Good evening, everyone. My name is Svetlana Suchkova. I direct the Academic Writing Center at the High School of Economics. I'm happy to welcome you at the very first event of the Academic Writing Center this semester. And this is going to be a panel discussion. We decided today to air our assumptions about how to deal with ups and downs of the reviewing process. I'm honored to introduce our panelists who found time to join us today, and they are in the alphabetical order. Petr Parshakov, a deputy head of the International Laboratory of Intangible Driven Economy, PERM. Sergey Popov, a leading research fellow at the Center for Institutional Studies. Elena Shakina, a deputy director, St. Petersburg. Alexey Tarasov, head of the Department of Theoretical Economics at the Faculty of Economic Sciences. Dmitry Veselov, a deputy dean for research at the Faculty of Economic Sciences. Yudkevich, a vice rector for academic affairs at the university. And Alexey, Zakharov, an associate professor at the Department of Theoretical Economics at the Faculty of Economic Science. I'm very grateful to you all for having agreed to participate in the discussion. And for us, it's a unique opportunity to communicate with researchers who serve both as recipients of reviews and as reviewers themselves. Usually people willingly share their publication successes. However, as for failures, we tend to go over them alone. And I decided to start with a question blitz to everyone. Have you ever received a rejection, and what did you do? Petr.
Multiple times. Usually I got rejections. Must have been rejected. I just resubmit paper. Last time I resubmit paper, I got 9 rejections because before paper was published in a decent journal.
Oh my. Sergey.
All right, so I am working in the economics of academia, and the best paper about that is now in the chat, where people ask Nobel laureates whether they get rejected. And there is one person they found that never got rejected, Bob Solow. So unless you are Bob Solow, you will get rejected. Now,
yes,
did I have rejections? Yes, I did. There was only one time when my paper got published immediately, and it was economic letters. Every other time it was multiple rejections. My longest revise and resubmit sequence was 6 different revise and resubmits, and every time I had to deal with comments. But yeah, most of the time it's just a reject that says your paper is garbage, go die in the ditch. And yeah, and what I do is I read the rejection, I try to learn something from it, and maybe it's because I wrote something badly, maybe it's because the referee is stupid. I try to see if there is something I can do to make my paper better. If not, I resubmit. If yes, I do something and then I resubmit.
Okay, we'll find out what can be a good solution, what to do after a rejection today during the discussion. Elena.
Yes, I have received rejections really many times. So I would say that rejections are much more often than acceptance letters. And one of the things that we have decided in our laboratory is to celebrate not just acceptance, but also rejections. So, and we didn't introduce it now, but when you got rejected, that everybody pays for your drinks. If you get accepted, then you pay for the drinks of the rest. For example, this rule, unfortunately, we have introduced it just before the pandemic started. So we couldn't experience that in offline, but that is what we would like to do after everything becomes normal.
Not a single one here who hasn't got a rejection. Yudkevich, have you got any rejection letters?
Of course, plenty of them. And we went a little bit further from Elena experience in terms of celebrated rejections. So far, I especially announced a special prize in our Center for Institutional Analysis for being a king or queen rejection person, and we're gonna announce that in the spring. So the person who would have like most number of rejection for the given year will get a special prize for me. So that's how we do that. And
such a cool idea.
Yeah, we'll see how it works. So far, we have quite many people who compete severely for this first place. We'll see how it goes. And as for me, when I get rejection, I normally send it to my co-author with comments how stupid the reviewers are. And the next day we start working on their like good comments. That's how we do that. So it's very good to have co-authors because you can share your pain of rejection. That's how it works.
Okay, thank you. Alexander, what about you? What do you do if you get rejection letters?
Yeah, of course, as everybody got numerous rejections. That's the pain of my life, actually, I think. But basically nowadays, the strategy is simple. It's if the paper is submitted the first or the second time, that perhaps I will revise it with my co-authors. Short revision, at most a month, maybe even less. And if it was submitted several times, then next day I submit it next journal, and I don't care anymore.
Okay, I see. Dmitry, how about you?
Yes, in this case, I try to find the key points of the reviewers. I read very attentively several times these letters, and it's always very interesting to see how people look on the paper. And I try to reformulate the ideas and to focus maybe on other journals to publish it again. Publish it again.
Alexey, and how frequent are your rejection letters?
Well, they are frequent. If you don't get rejected, you are just not submitting enough papers. I once talked to a highly published senior colleague who was giving a talk at HSE, and he said, I've been rejected about 200 times.
Oh my, you are the king already.
And this guy is like a senior economist. So yeah, if you're afraid of sending a paper to a journal because you get rejected, then you're not doing it right. You should not be afraid.
Okay, that's a great relief, I would say. That it's good to know that negative reviews do happen, and they do happen even to reviewers themselves. So we're in the same boat. Now I'm going to choose a question and address it to our panelists one by one. They will talk for about 5 minutes. If you have questions, don't forget to write it in the chat. And of course, all dear panelists, you can add to any comments or share your experience. And the first question is, what are the most frequent reasons for rejection? And I'm addressing this question to Alexander Tarasov. You're welcome.
Okay, so thanks a lot. And actually, I think Sergey answered this question. The main reason, yeah, the paper is garbage. Yeah, so of course, yeah, I still have 5 minutes and I'm going to talk more. I would distinguish maybe between 3-4 reasons, typical reasons why the paper is rejected. The first one is the text, and typically, and as a reviewer, I saw it quite a lot of times, the text, and here I'm not talking about the contribution, the algebra, or maybe the empirical analysis. I'm talking really about words, about the text. The text is not readable. And maybe it's not necessarily English. It's mostly, very often it's about just, the authors cannot explain the ideas. The text is not clear. It's hard to follow. It's hard to understand what they are doing, and so on and so on. This irritates really, really a lot. And quite often, you just see a reviewer, for instance, you write, okay, I just cannot understand unfortunately, I cannot understand what the authors would like to say in this paper. Yeah, so, and Quick comment regarding that. So again, it's not necessarily English. Sometimes English is not perfect, but still the paper written in a quite accurate way. It's structured well. So it's more about how you express your thoughts, your ideas, your motivation, your contribution. So the second one, I think I would mention it's wrong analysis in general. So it's some problems with algebra, some problems with assumptions, maybe too strong assumptions, some problems with identification strategy if they talk about empirical analysis. So basically it's critical problems with the analysis. So in this case, yeah, clearly, if they're not fixable or if it's not clear how to fix them, so it's very likely it's rejection. Taken again, guys, take into account numerous papers submitted to journals. So nowadays it's crazy what's going on. I compared for one journal the situation 5 or 8 years ago, and the number of submission increased dramatically. So the competition is huge. And finally, the main reason, and I started with that, but I rephrased Sergey, so I will not mention, so some bad words about paper, but really the main reason, in my opinion, is very short sentence: the contribution is not enough. And this is what I think all of us, perhaps so many times. Why? I mean, there are many reasons why contribution is not enough, but that's basically the main reason. And I personally prefer to see this honest reason in my reports as an offer. It's fair, it's okay, because the reviewing process is very subjective, rather than the referees trying to find something better about my paper, and they just don't want to say that the contribution is not enough. This is painful. So maybe one last thing. So sometimes, for instance, I faced this several times. Referees asked me to rewrite the paper. So the paper is not that bad, but they think that I should write it in a completely different way. I mean, it's not that often, but at least in my case, it's also very painful, and I don't think it's a really good thing to say. But it's also an important reason. You can see it very often, and in any case, I would relate it to the same main thing: contribution is not enough. The referees just try, to come up with some justifying the rejection, which is sometimes not a good thing to do. Okay, so I think I'm more or less on time. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Alexander. And especially, I would like to thank you for mentioning that English is not the major reason, like very many people think. And I have analyzed several articles which were about reasons for rejection. And in 5 of them, none mentions English as the major reason for rejection, but the way of arguing, and the main thing is methods, of course, and novelty of contribution. Okay, thank you very much. Dear panelists, anyone would like to add anything to what Alexander has said?
Sure, following up on that English comment, editors and referees use English mastery as a way of throwing out your paper without having a meaningful contribution about why your paper should be thrown out. They are not throwing you out because the English is bad. They have other reasons, but they don't want to voice these reasons. And they say, oh, just the English is garbage, we should throw this out. Okay,
yeah,
how do I know that? Because I got multiple cases when one referee report said, English is fantastic, written very well. The second report says, English is garbage. I know people who were born in England, who went to English school, who went to English university, okay? Not a native English speaker. They read in the referee report just because their name is not John Smith, okay? So yes, they do write that your English is bad, but that's not the reason why they reject your paper.
Okay, true, thank you. Do not believe them. Right, Elena wanted to say something. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, just very briefly. I'm not sure that is the case of economic journals, but for example, in my field in business and management, is quite often the reason to reject the paper is just that you don't fit in the scope of the journal. Because so in case of economics is like, so there are like much more general interest journals than in other studies. And in that way, I just wanted to say that, especially for young researchers, not be upset when you got rejected because of the scope, because the only way to receive this experience is to publish a lot of papers and to get a lot of rejections while you try to understand whether your paper potentially may be considered by this journal or not.
Okay, thank you, Elena. Wonderful recommendation of reading the writer's guidelines and the scope of the journal to make it a good fit. Okay, thank you very much. And now I have one more question, and I address it to Alexey Zakharov, who is going to use the opportunity of demonstrating the screen while I'm giving the question. So the question is, how can the author organize their response to the review effectively? And how can the author communicate their disagreement with the reviewer's comments? Okay, Alexey, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so that's just like a really short presentation I've prepared for this question. It's mostly about the first part, how to organize the response to the reviewer. First you should, a response is a self-contained document. It's a document consisting of several parts. First, there is a summary of what you did to your paper, a short summary, no more than like a couple of paragraphs. And then you should address each reviewer in detail. Second, it's extremely important. The reviewer is always right. You should be polite and respectful all the time, even if, especially if the reviewer doesn't understand the paper. Reviewers can be rude. Reviewers can really say that this is a pile of shit. And I've seen reviews like I've never written a review like that, but I've been on the receiving end of a rude review, and there's absolutely nothing you can do about this. Don't try to fight with a reviewer. It's not. It's really not a good idea. You are a hostage, and the reviewer has a gun to your head. Basically, you have to be nice. Now, another point, you should accept the blame. If the reviewer fails to understand something, it's not because the reviewer is stupid and didn't understand. It happens. You know, sometimes reviewers are not from your specialty, but it's always, you're treated as if it is always your fault. If it were your fault. And don't try to confront a reviewer, even if you suspect the reviewer has an ulterior motive. For example, like trying to sit on your paper and then kind of pilfer the results while your paper is being reviewed. So you have to be very nice and tactful all the time. This is what is expected from you. Now, as I said, once again, the response has to be self-contained. Reviewers are people who voluntarily take the time to read your paper and write a response. Don't make them go back and forth between the response and the paper. If the reviewer gets confused, the reviewer will get angry and you will suffer. You will suffer, the review, not the review. So it has to be a self-contained, largely, as far as it's possible. So basically, you can take whole citations from your text and insert them into the response. Then respond to every point raised by the reviewer, point by point. So basically, you just quote. Sometimes I do the following: I just take the quote from the review, from the reviewers, from the review, and then write a careful response. Take a second to a quote, and so forth, just to make sure that you have exhaustively gone through the reviewer's text and address every single point. Sometimes you can use typography. For example, you highlight when the text is from a reviewer and the regular text is your normal text is your response. Now be direct. So basically, after kind of you're presenting the point, you're presenting the reviewer's paragraph, and then you have to be very short. Okay, I did this and this and this, and then you go into more detail. The reviewers, you should always think of reviewers, what's on the reviewer's mind. You have to be very polite, and you have to save their time. You don't want your response to be confusing, because otherwise the reviewer will say, okay, I don't know what this person said. This response is not satisfactory. So whenever possible, do what the reviewer asks. Sometimes it is impossible. So you say, okay, we'll leave this for further research. Oh, there are kind of requirements. This will make the paper too large. Refer to the editor, but be very careful to explain why you don't address this or that point, but you should address the majority of the points, definitely. And be careful to be clear about what changed with the previous version. So basically these are, okay, so this is the source where I got them. These are the rules. Now, writing, if you really disagree with the reviewer, writing a letter to the editor is it's more difficult. It's a more delicate matter, because the editor will have to weight his how much because the editor knows the reviewer, right? So there are political considerations here. I'd never complained to an editor about a reviewer. So basically, maybe someone else will tell you more about this, but probably maybe sometimes it is. But even if you do decide to do it, you have to be extremely polite and say, okay, I disagree with the reviewer on this comment. I think the reviewer misunderstood. But it's always the rule to be polite. Okay, so thank you. I think.
Thank you very much, Alexey. That was quite an exhaustive list of recommendations, actually almost a love song to reviewers. And that's true. We should love reviewers because they do their job free of charge. This is their contribution to the scientific community.
Because they got a gun to your head and you don't have a gun. Basically, that is a basic fact of life when you're dealing with a review.
Okay. Anyone who would like to add any of the tips? Panelists?
Well, fundamentally, you want the reviewer to understand that what you do is good. And the reviewer kind of told you why what you did is not good. So if you miss something, the reviewer can say, that was the most important thing in my letter, and his job is done, right? So you did not address his most important point, right? So if you miss something, if you don't address a specific point, the reviewer will come after you. If you piss the reviewer off, for instance, you will say, yeah, I know about this Ivanov guy, but he's an idiot and he doesn't, that's probably Ivanov is referring you right now, okay? So be very, very, very polite about everybody.
Because people sometimes look for excuses.
They hold grudges. They after that, they like pursue you for 20 years and they write terrible things in all of your papers about all of your papers. So like, I mean, but on the other hand, if you address all of their questions, it is unlikely they will come up with new problems. They can, but it's unlikely. And it's unlikely that the editor will say, oh, now there are different problems, right? That you did not see before, and now you have to deal with them. So this refereeing letter is a contract in a sense. It's a vague, unenforceable contract, right? But if you address all the points, it's likely that besides these points, nothing else will be asked from you. So there are two reasons why you want to address every point. One is because every unaddressed point is a reason to reject you. And the other one is addressing each point means new points will not happen.
And the reviewer has to feel victorious.
Right. So like, thank you for your great suggestion, right?
Yes, so
now my paper is much better.
If you fail to satisfy a single point, that might be just a kind of an excuse for the reviewer to reject your reject your paper.
Yeah, think about it like that. So the referee is a busy person, right? He has a referee report to write. If he sees a way of being done with you in 5 minutes, he will be done with you in 5 minutes. He doesn't care about your life. Okay? If he sees a reason to, you know, bid you farewell, he will.
Can I just butt in, please, here? I think that reviewing process and discussing review is not about just making the reviewer happy. It's kind of negotiating the content. And I would like to come back to the second part of the question. If you do not agree with the reviewers, it's normal, it's welcomed to give you arguments why you do not agree with some of the points. But you have to provide reasons. You have to give references. So you can argue with the reviewer, but in a very polite form. Okay, thank you very much. Let's come next. Some people say that it's not feeling victorious. It's not about reviewers, but about reviewees as well. And the next question is, what kind of negative review does every author dream of? Because authors should welcome all reviewers and negative as well. And this is the question to Maria Yudkevich.
Thank you, Svetlana. I think that there is no such a person as a perfect reviewer. So everything is very subjective and there is no perfect person in this sense. You might think that perfect reviewer might look like perfect research advisor. He helps you with your research question, he helps you with your language, and he also emotionally supports you. It doesn't happen. So I also suspect that such a person as a perfect research advisor doesn't exist as well, but speaking for reviewer, I'm pretty sure that he doesn't. So, but I will try to summarize several very subjective points which make me happy when I read negative review. First, I think the key point for me is I would prefer to get my rejection letters in time. So it's really upset me to get any rejection, but when it comes in a couple of weeks, it's make me happier than if it comes in 9 months with just a couple of lines saying that it's all bullshit. So, so my personal rule for being a reviewer is that if I have some delays with my reviews, I need to write extra week of delay, add several lines to the paper, to the review I write to the person. So it's my way to apologize of like saying, okay, I had no time to read your stupid paper, but I'll try to do my best to give you better feedback. That's what I do. First, I also appreciate when reviewer really reads my paper. And reading reviews, I do understand that sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes I see, what's a stupid person, he didn't look what I wrote on the page, in the footnote of page 18, which explains the essence of my paper. But in reality, it's only me who is the person to be blamed, because if I didn't put that straightforward enough, it's not a problem of reviewer. But I would be really happy if the reviewer reads everything line by line and helps me with that, but I do understand that it almost never happens. I also feel much more happy if I see comments and suggestions which are doable. So when I read review, like, it's a nice paper, it's a nice research question, what you need to do is just to collect new data, to throw existing data away, and once you collect a new one, it can be published. So when I realize that it's not things to happen, it makes me unhappy in a way. What I also appreciate in reviews is when first, as Sergey mentions, they're direct in a way that there is a straightforward explanation what's wrong without any polite and fuzzy explanations that your English is not perfect and you might think of something like that. So being straightforward is important for me in being a good reviewer. What I also appreciate is a clear structure of review. Sometimes I get reviews which I see are structured in a way as paper has been read. So that's we always quite often do. We read paper, we make notes, and after that we just send those notes to the journal without any structuring that. I think it's not very good because there's a mixture of some key important points and some technical stuff. And for you, it's clear what is what, but for your reader, it might be not that clear. So what I would prefer is that having some major important flaws of the paper, then some suggestions for improving, and after that, some technical issues like to correct something. And but what I care about is, as probably what Alexander mentioned in the very beginning, for me, it's important to get a clear signal. Shall I just like resend the paper to another journal because it's not a good fit to this journal, but the paper might be potentially improved based on review? And if yes, what should I do? And finally, even there is no such a person as a perfect reviewer, I think that it's our probably duty to try to approach this ideal person from outside. That's how that decreases entropy in a way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have just a question. You mentioned several features of almost an ideal review. Do you write in this way, trying to take into consideration all the points that you have just made?
It happens sometimes. So, but not every time, but I try to do my best in that. So sometimes happens, yeah.
Okay. Anyone who would like to add anything about? Yes, Sergey, you're welcome.
Fundamentally, the reviewer's job is very different from the co-author's job. Starting reviewers think that what they ask is how to write this paper better. That's not what they're asked. What they're asked is there anything that's preventing this paper from being published? Okay, so you are not in charge of writing the best paper together with the author. Okay, you're not an advisor, right? What you do is you're making sure the paper is good enough, and it frames the resulting referee report differently. So like, it would also be interesting to look at. No, that's a bad referee report, okay? So a good referee report would say, here are things that I need to have in the paper before I can say it's good enough to be published in American Economic Review. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's a perfect referee report.
That's a very interesting point of view, because sometimes I do read reviewers' comments that are meant to help the author. And sometimes they do advise on the ways of improving the paper. But maybe your way, your look at it is more objective, I would say. Yes, Sergey, thank you very much. Anyone else? Okay.
Elena, yes. Yeah.
Yes, can I
yes.
just, what I also noticed that there is like different subcultures in different fields. I mean, sometimes you really, so I receive different, because sometimes I'm publishing also in economic journals, maybe not very high economic journals. In that sense, I understand that there is also kind of subculture there. But what I really see that sometimes reviewers are very tough and in some fields. I mean, and all these issues that we have been discussing just now, that they are sometimes rude, but they have right to do. So I disagree. So I don't think that they can be rude just because they are tired and they don't want to do the thing. That is a kind of follow up what Maria said, that if you don't want to do review, nobody can force you to do that. So if you really overload it, so just don't accept. So you always have this opportunity. But in some fields, you really see that so they are very polite, so they write a lot of good work, but then the conclusion is to reject. So that is also not very good, because then you really don't understand what was the real reason to reject your paper. And Yes, so this subculture, they are evolving just with our own contribution. So if we serve as a good reviewer and we try to change our attitude according to what we would expect from reviewers, so probably with time it is going to change as well. So that is mine.
Thank you, Elena. That was a very important comment about cultural attitude towards the texts, and a lot of hedging, especially from reviews from Great Britain, because this is the norm. They are supposed to write politely, not that straightforwardly like Russians do, for example. And you see, very many panelists use very many emotionally colored words, and it's understandable because it's really a very emotional process. Some of them were negatively colored, and let us switch on more positive issues. And my next question is, what criteria should the author meet to get a positive review? And what is a successful paper? And this is the question to Sergey.
Wonderful, thank you, ma'am. So there is a book, I'm gonna put a link in the chat now, where a number of editors wrote what they want from people when they submit a paper. And referees, usually successful referees, are those that make editors' job easier, right? So if you are making the editor's job harder, you're probably not gonna get another request to referee a paper. So when I read this book, the interesting thing was that different editors want different things. And that's actually one of the big benefits of working or studying in places where there is a lot of editors. So you can come to the editor, show him your paper and say, is that something that will be publishable in American Economic Review? I can do that in Cardiff, right? Because I don't have any editors of American Economic Review with me in Cardiff. But people who are working in Boston, right? They can do that. And that helps them to publish a lot, not because there is corruption, but because they understand better what editors want, okay?
Do you think it's ethical? I'm sorry for interruption.
Is it ethical to ask people what do they want? Yes. Like, unethical would be something like being a part of the committee that gives out prizes and then give the prize to your wife. That would be unethical, right? Now, having said that, I think that the important part about submission is to make sure that your paper is fitting the journal scope, right? If you have a paper and you submit it to European Journal of Political Economy, right? And you don't have any papers from that journal in your list of references, like, why do you think this is a good fit for this journal, right? Maybe it is a good fit for this journal. Maybe you just happen to cite all the papers from American Journal of Political Science and not from European Journal of Political Economy. That's fine, right? But how do you know that this journal might be might be relevant for you? Is you look at your references, you see which journals do you cite in there, right? So then think about what kind of papers are getting published there. Open the journal, look at it, right? Is there any theory about, Banach spaces? Well, maybe don't send your paper on Banach spaces into the journal that doesn't publish papers on Banach spaces, right? There is some experience. There is some, like if you go to conferences and you meet people and you talk to them, you learn about where your paper would work well. So I have one experience when I talked to a person, explained him a paper, and he said, send it, make it small and send it to this journal. And I did that and it got accepted there. And he was not an editor or referee or anything. I'm sure in that completely. I mean, fundamentally, you gotta be very lucky. So there are things you can do, right? So write well in clear and understandable fashion, do something useful for the world, right? Ask interesting questions, right? And then there is stuff that you don't know. So that's what you can do, right? And there is stuff that you cannot do anything about, right? Sometimes you get unlucky. And like, recognize the difference when you could improve something in your paper, right? And when you cannot improve anything. And if you cannot improve anything, you are done with it. The important things are making sure that that's what the editor wants, making sure that's what the journal wants, and making sure it's valuable. Like in who is going to cite your paper, right? Are they the same people who are citing papers from this journal? So if you have these three, that's pretty much all you can do about making your paper better. I was surprised how many mistakes in English I had first time when I sent it to an editor. Okay, I had an English language editor and I sent my paper to an English language editor, and there were a lot of mistakes and I fixed a lot of them. On the 10th time, I was disagreeing with some of the corrections, okay? Because, well, the way I write, the way economists write, and the way that a native English speaker, English major writes, they are different ways, right? So it's not so much terminology, it's general stuff as well. So I guess my point is, the English editor helps at the beginning a little bit, right? But other stuff is important as well. It's not the deal breaker. You can write it so terribly, so unreadably, right? It's possible, but it is kind of useful, but not that much useful as other people try to convince you. So I guess my point there is that if you have money for an English editor, fine, spend some money, see if the English editor suggested you something useful. If they didn't, they didn't. It costs like, I don't know, $300, I mean, for that decent size paper. So it's not terribly expensive, but not everybody has $300, all right? I'm not sure I answered the questions, but if you have any clarifications, please ask me now and I can clarify anything at the Saturday.
We decided that we will come with the questions at the end. Fine. And you will have a chance to add. But I would like to thank you and for several points. One is that confidence comes with writing and practice. That's true. In that journal business is business, and that's why you are supposed to read what the journal publishes before submitting your papers into this or that journal. Thank you very much. Any other comments about criteria for a successful paper, panelists? Anyone?
Can I very quickly?
Yeah, sure.
If possible. So for me, it's not that clear what's the successful paper. So imagine you write a paper, okay, you polish this couple of revisions, and then it's the paper, it's done. And then the question is now how to place it in the journal, but the paper itself will not change anymore. That's the paper. Is it successful or not? Does it depend on the journal you are able to publish in? I don't know, that's a big issue. Therefore, I would maybe mention that one question is whether the paper is successful or not. And the other question is how to publish this paper and to place it well. And these two questions are sometimes, or maybe even very often, quite different.
Fundamentally, the biggest problem is how do you feel about your papers? So some people feel papers is something like you make pancakes in the diner, right? What I feel about my papers is that there is God and he's talking to me and I only need to write down whatever he's telling me, right? So, and then I need to like make it like a paper, have an introduction, have a conclusion, but the main thing inside there, right? It's not me, right? So like, do I need to have an idea of the journal when I'm writing this down? No, right? I'm just writing it down, putting on my website, people cite it. I'm sending that to journals because my employer wants me to send it to the journals. I'm sending it to the journals. Some of them accept it. Then citations go faster after it gets accepted. But at the end of the day, the reason why I'm doing this profession is not so much because I like money. I could earn much more in the investment bank. The reason why I'm working in this field is because I enjoy the intellectual consumption of writing stuff from outside of, physical realm.
Thank you, Sergey, for your emotional responses. Authorial voice is really very important. That's true. Okay, great. We are coming next, and I apologize for the next question, and I apologize to all those people who joined us and who are not from Russian culture, because the next question is connected with the way Russian writers write. And the question sounds like, what are the most frequent mistakes Russian scholars make while writing for publication? And I address this question to Elena Shakina. You're welcome.
Thank you very much, Svetlana. Yes, actually, so I missed one of your emails, and I didn't know that exactly this question will be addressed to me. I was not attentive. However, actually, it's one of the questions that I really care about, because I committed many mistakes, and I didn't listen for those people who knew more about that. So I was really much convinced in many let's say, things that now I don't think are relevant when you are a Russian author or co-author. So actually, it was very interesting experience now to read, because so those who are following our chat box, they have seen that it was a discussion about who cares about Russia. Do you think that there is any discrimination of Russian authors? So the short answer from my subjective, at least my subjective perception, is there is no discrimination, and there is no issue about who cares about Russia, but in heads of Russian authors. So I really don't think that somebody cares about any particular country. I agree with Sergey, who said that there is a kind of bias towards American issue, because there is like so good journals, still, at least in economics for sure, and management and business as well. They are really from US, and they really much, let's say, they care more about the country. But what I think is really important for any paper, no matter whether it is written on data of Russia, India, China, Brasilia, or US, is that this empirical knowledge that you have obtained from this data is really relevant and can be generalized. So I really think that Russian context is very much understudied, because Russia has unique context, which you will never meet, at least nowadays, and you can register data nowadays that may be taken from US or any European country. So really, Russia being in this transformational period when institutions were changing, and some of these institutions were changing, like bringing some exogenous variation, which is very important for economists, is for empirical data, it's a very good laboratory to be studied. So in that sense, I really was very much convinced that, and when we started our research center, we have collected data about European companies. We try to do it more or less representative for European Union, and we saw that now it is a key to success. I would say that much better feedback and much more impact of our papers are related to those which were written on Russian context. And so when we attracted first our international professors, and they said, but why you are not speaking about Russia? So there's so many researchers outside Russia who really try to get to obtain Russian data. And many of them, they were working with us just to, so I mean, that the first motivation to join us as co-authors was about data. And I was telling the same, and many of my colleagues, young colleagues, saying that who cares about Russia? And now we really realize that being in Russia and knowing many things that would never be, let's say, in depth interpreted by somebody who's outsider, makes this paper much deeper and makes these papers that we are writing on Russian. I'm speaking now, of course, about empirical work, because so for theoretical works is not an issue. But really, this deeper understanding about Russian context and also specific features that you can take only from Russian context may make your paper much more valuable than you just take data from anything else. And one more thing, I really understand that now the situation is changing, and there is like, so it used to be double-blind review process. Now in many journals, you have just one-side blind review. So it means that reviewers, they really see names. And of course, editors, they always see. But what I really, so from my experience as a reviewer, I can distinguish papers which were written by Russian authors. Not just because of the language. So we have some things which makes us similar, not just an accent, but also something that we are overusing, I would say. And you realize that is native Russian speaker. But also what I have seen, I was really surprised that many Russian authors, they oversight Russian authors. And that really creates a kind of problem, because it makes your literature, so relation to the literature, not very representative. So that is the second thing that I would suggest for Russian authors not to do, is to think about that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. Anyone would like to add anything? Because you definitely review papers of Russian authors. Maybe there are some specific culture-specific features and advice that you can give. Not anyone?
There is nothing like generic, like specifically Russian, but generically, if other people read your papers, that helps. So if what we had in University of Illinois was that there was me, the economist, there was another person, business, with another person in marketing, another person in finance. We had no idea whether what we are doing in our papers is important or why is it important, right? But we could read English. And one guy was Brazilian, one was Chinese, one was, I think, something like Iranian. But I guess my point is, we read one paper by one of us all together. And then we went like sentence after sentence. Is that a good sentence? So that exercise, I did it for a month, I think. That helped me a lot, not only because they read my paper, but also because I read their paper and I saw their mistakes. And I saw how to say it better because I didn't have their bias.
Okay, Sergey, thank you very much. Having experienced of reading papers of authors from different cultures, once being an editor for an international journal, I recognize some of the patterns that are culture specific. And if we speak about Russians, we can say that Russians try very often, they do not write conclusions very explicitly, thinking that the reader can read between lines. And reading the text linguistically, I can suggest here that we should give explicitly, everything should be written, even if you think that the author can infer from the text. It's one thing. Another thing is, coming back to Elena's point, is that definitely I wish we could have more papers based on the Russian context. That's true. But what we as Russian authors should learn is to answer the question, so what, for international audience? Why Russian data can be interesting to international audience? Okay, thank you very much. And we're coming to the next question. What three things are a must in corresponding with reviewers, and what three things shouldn't the author do while responding to reviewers' comments? And the floor is yours, Petr.
Yeah, thank you. I think that most of the points they are already said, but before joining this meeting, I talked to my supervisor and a friend who is an editor of the journal, and I asked the same questions to him. And he told the first what he told me was, don't say the referees are stupid. Don't say the referees' comments are stupid, and don't say anything insulting about the comments, even if you got insulting comments. And his next sentence was that you should not do this even if you think so, because while discussing, so yesterday we got a referee report, and while discussing this report with the same guy who is an editor of the journal, we were using words like totally stupid, useless comment, haven't read the paper, and so on. But still, so don't say that comments are stupid. And the second point is probably, it was also discussed today, that even that you can agree and then disagree. So don't say that this comment is not relevant for your paper. It probably is, and you can at least formally first to agree. You can agree with this comment, and then you can explain why you think this is not so relevant as the referee thinks. And then address all the points of the referee, and even the same point is said in different part of the review, and even the same point was raised by different referees. It is much easier for them if you address this point each time. So usually we are preparing just I don't know, point by point answer, and as Alexey probably told, you should remember that the answer to referee is a separate document, and it is much easier for referee when it is self-contained. So, and yeah, and finally, I think that that was so. I'm not a native speaker, as you probably noticed. So I proofread my papers which I submit, and the advice which I got from my supervisors was that you should also proofread your answer to referee. So at least buy some software, because if your paper is written in good English, thanks to the proofreader or editor, then it is hard for referee to understand why you had good English in your text and awful English in your answer to referee. So it's easy now, and yeah, you can do it. And that's probably all. I think that all other points which I have, they are already discussed by the previous speakers.
Thank you, Petr. That was a very valuable piece of advice about just using at least some of the software, like Grammarly, for example, or just Microsoft Spell Check. That's true. Some people do ignore that. I have a question to probably other panelists. Do you have any techniques that you can recommend? I heard that some people use colors, or they number the lines and then refer to them. Do you have any practical techniques or practical pieces of advice? Anyone?
Use PDF. If you do Word, it will get screwed up by another person using another version of Word. I don't like myself using colors because you have to keep in mind which colors you used when, and B, if people print it on a black and white printer, they don't appreciate it anyway. So I guess my point is think about the person who is getting that. Most likely that person is a relatively old guy with a black and white printer who will print out your referee report, print out a new version of your paper, and will go with 2 papers in front of him, and we'll try to match that. So yeah, don't get too creative with typesetting, because that angers people, and like as long as you're clear enough, you'll be fine.
Okay, thank you, Sergey. Anyone else? Any techniques? Anytime? Okay, yeah, Elena.
So actually, we had a very interesting experience, especially with using colors, because once we almost were rejected on the 3rd round, saying that they use 2 colors, and which means that they don't respect the reviewer. So really, we have That was funny, especially that editor said that please highlight with yellow, so even emphasizing the kind of color that he would like to see it. We have done everything accordingly. But then, fortunately, we wrote then email saying that it's like very strange way to reject a paper, and finally it was solved. But really, you have to be very careful, because sometimes people, they just get pissed off with, just because they see not what they expect. Now, usually, in this, my experience is really to write very, let's say, very detailed response letter, just showing a particular page in which it was made, and copying the part of the text that you have introduced or you have removed, just explicitly saying about that, because I understand that everybody is using different kind of editors. I know that with PDF also for some referees may not work. Using track of changes in Word may also create problems if they use different applications. So I mean that just saying in the response letter everything that you have done and citing what you have changed, if it's possible, it makes it better. So, and I'm as a reviewer, I prefer this way of working with the second round or third round.
Okay, briefly, we can say be reviewer friendly, okay, whatever technique you're choosing. Okay, thank you very much. And we have one more question, and this is going to be the last question for the official part of the panel discussion. And this is the question to Dmitry Veselov. Are there any benefits of becoming a reviewer, and how can one become a reviewer? Though Sergey mentioned that probably reviewers can be just gray-haired people, but now we have a generation of reviewers who are getting younger and younger. Okay, Dmitry, the floor is yours.
That's right. Yeah, thank you very much. So there are also the costs of becoming the reviewer. So we need to spend much time of reading the paper and looking on every details of this paper. But indeed, benefits are much more, because finally, it's an opportunity to be on the other side of the publication process and to enlarge your knowledge in this field, and mostly to look differently on papers, not like authors, but try to find really the core problems of the papers and ways how to improve it. And that's why, I mean, the best case for reviewers is just to get the paper in the narrow field, and finally, the paper who has a very interesting and fresh ideas in this field, and really understand this paper very much and provide detailed feedback to the author. And that's why to provide contribution to this field and to the literature, and also to learn more from this paper. But it's not always like this. So there are many different options, especially sometimes to review papers in other fields or in narrow, like not narrow fields, but in fields close to your areas of expertise. And in this case, it's always need to have a general look on this area of research and to know very much the literature. And that's why to learn more generally from this process. So another thing that I want to add is that, of course, always to be a reviewer, it means also to be the part of the social network, academic social network. And that's why it's likely to have a reputation, to have a knowledge in this field and to provide a feedback. And I mean, it's also like to be in like detail, in contact with the editors of the journal. And that's why it's also an opportunity to improve the reputation in this field. And I mean, it's generally it's a part of the academic job. So I mean, it's like the part of the job of the author or editor and so on. So that's why, like, it's nice to have such an opportunity and such a possibility to be a reviewer. The direct way to become a reviewer, like the main entrance ticket, is to publish the paper in a journal, because in this case, like, people know that you are familiar with this field, you're a specialist in this field, and that's why they can provide like opportunity to be a reviewer. But of course, it's not the main option. There are some other options, and mostly they're connected with social networks. So if like there are possibilities to present the paper on good conferences, especially on specialized conferences, to contact with people in the field, it provides opportunities to be familiar with people and finally to become a reviewer. And mostly, usually like young reviewers, they try to be much more detailed and much more attentive to works, because I mean, they're ready to provide efforts and time to look more in detail on the paper. And more experienced reviewers, sometimes they can provide some general look on the paper and try the core problems of the papers, as I see from like my own experience of getting many reviewers. So that's why, I mean, it's really appreciated to be a reviewer, from my understanding. Yeah.
Thank you, Dmitry. Dmitry mentioned several of the benefits of becoming reviewers. And I have a question to all the panelists. How did you become a reviewer? Any old boy network?
Can I?
Yeah, sure.
So basically, very typical way, at least perhaps, in Europe and the United States for sure, very typical way is that your advisor is the editor. And of course, in this case, he asks you, then your PhD students to revise papers. Yeah, and I don't know, I mean, I remember my experience that I was a PhD student and revised the papers. It was horrible. I wrote so bad reviews. It's now I read them a couple, I don't know, half a year ago, some of them, and it was, I don't know, I was a bad guy. So this is those the most toughest guys. Keep in mind that perhaps they are PhD students.
That's a very valuable experience anyway. Okay, thank you, Alexander. Anyone else?
Can I add here?
Yeah.
It's my personal experience, not about a journal review, but a discussion of the paper on the conference. My first serious conference was in Oxford, organized by Young Economist Society. It was like a Young Economist meeting in 2001 in Oxford. It was my first presentation ever in international conference, and actually my first being discussant. And I was nervous because my presentation was at the very last of the very last session of the last day. So I had a 3 days of nightmare. And at the very end, my presentation was the last one in a row. And I also had to discuss a paper by another guy. I almost don't remember my presentation, which I did, because it was so scary experience that I totally forget how it happened, but I remember for probably the rest of my life how I was discussing. I was the most awful discussant of the conference ever, because in the same time I was very unpolite, probably being rude. Also, I spoke terrible English, so people learned that I'm saying something very harsh, but they could hardly understand what I'm saying. It was very inconstructive in a way that I was very much criticizing the paper without suggesting what to do with the paper. And the problem was that I never learned how to discuss papers. And before going to the conference, I asked my colleagues, how should you discuss paper of the conference? And I got the most awful advice from some of the persons at that time, he said, just be honest. And I did my best, like, in being honest. And what I learned from that experience is that you should be person in a sense. And even if you're like write harsh things and you're rude, try to be constructive and try to like make person to benefit from what you're writing, not just like expressing your emotions about what you're doing. And if you write reviews, you have some advantage because you can write it and then probably correct and then to do it in the best way possible. But it was a nightmare. And probably next time we might also discuss how to give like oral comments on the conference, because it's also a really hard experience, especially for young people. But for me, it was like toughest experience for many years to come, how to do that. And I found that guy was like totally disgusted. He was like totally shocked about like learning everything about his paper. And the next time I went through Oxford Garden and I met him because he was running. He did his running exercise in the morning, and I tried to approach him, and he tried to escape me because he decided that I want to like find him and finally add a little bit more to my comments. And I had to stop him and like say sorry for being that rude, but next time was much more polite in a way. Thanks. Just wanted to share this experience.
That's a wonderful story, and that gives me an idea to think of a webinar or seminar with a role play, how to criticize papers. Thank you for the idea, Maria. Okay, Elena, you wanted to say something. Go ahead.
So I think that one of the most frequent way to become reviewer is when they publish in a certain journal, and then they start sending you papers to review. But actually, I don't have much experience, and sometimes I don't understand why some journals, they really ask you, and very oftenly some journals don't approach you. But really, I understand how to become undesirable reviewer, and that happens in my, let's say, in the beginning of my career as a reviewer. So I was just receiving papers from like a couple of journals, and now they don't send me anymore because I felt such deep empathy to authors that I was not able to reject anything. So really my worst resolution was major revision. And even if I didn't even thought that this paper bore something, I mean, that it can be improved. So after some, maybe 2 or 3 times, they just excluded me. I'm not receiving anymore. Now I'm more, let's say, experienced, and I'm becoming like, sometimes I reject, again, very rarely. So usually I really give a chance, maybe it's not good. But this is, yes. So if editors see that you always accept or recommend, revise, resubmit, they don't like that, of course.
Okay, you are a kind reviewer. Okay. How are we doing time-wise? Okay. My suggestion now is let us form a list of do's and don'ts, and I'm suggesting giving 1 sentence tip with do's and don'ts. Okay. Could you please just think what the most valuable tip you could share from your experience? All right, Alexander, we'll start with you.
So
1 sentence tip.
Then it's easy. Never ever ignore any comment or suggestion made by the referees and editor. Never ever.
Okay, thank you. Maria Yudkevich.
Probably like stupid but workable piece of advice. Read the review several times and try to get as much of it as possible. Sometimes it helps.
Okay, Sergey.
So do try to sell your paper. Like if I have a paper about publications in economics, and I try to sell it to economics journals, to business journals, to management journals, to leadership journals. I didn't write it in the same way, okay? Don't take rejection as a reflection on your ability. There is so much more than your ability in the decision to reject that it's just not informative at all.
Okay, thank you. Elena.
So maybe my piece of advice is a little bit different from what people just, so I mean that from my side. So I just try to enjoy the process of writing papers with different co-authors. Really, I have received, so I see that in many cases, people, they just get used to write with somebody, so they feel comfortable, they know each other already quite fine, and so they're like very, very connected to each other. But really, once I decided to experience writing with different people, and I realized how that improved my writing, my understanding of how papers have to be written and sold, as Sergey just mentioned. So this experience, I think, is very valuable, especially for those who are starting their career, academic career.
Okay, enjoy reading and responding to reviewers in a way. Okay, thank you. Petr.
If you like your paper, just resubmit it after the rejection immediately.
Right. Dmitry?
Yes, my comment is that try to learn from every rejection and try to find a good opportunity to improve your work in every rejection. So it's very important to learn from this process and to ameliorate the paper.
Right. Thank you very much. That looks a very good summary and a very good list of tips. Okay, anyway, our time is up, and I would like to say a big, big thank you to all our panelists. I think that was a very interesting perspective. Now we've seen our panelists both as recipients of reviews, as authors and reviewers themselves. So thank you very much for your time, and all the participants of the workshop. Thank you very much for your time, for joining us. And please do follow our website for other workshops and for courses. Welcome to the center. Welcome to use our services. And goodbye for now.